Next up, we have our video game addiction team, Casey and Wilson, talk about some of the new research they've been working on.
Hello, I'm Casey.
And I'm Wilson.
And we're going to be presenting video games and gambling. So, there we go. I don't know why that went black. Okay, so how many of you, if anyone, have played video games? Okay, actually a lot more people than I would have expected. Okay, Carol, what have you played?
Oh, gosh.
Just give me an example.
I'm too old. Pac-Man?
Okay, so Pac-Man's a perfect example. Pac-Man is a very perfect example of much older games.
Thank you.
We also have, a big part of this too is to look at the evolution of video games, and Pac-Man is a perfect example of when video games were starting to become very popular through arcades, and also when they started to become more popular in the home on the Atari system with games like Pong, which many of you might know. But also, when we look at the evolution of video games, we want to look at how they have changed throughout the years and how they used to be simple like Pac-Man, where you just used to move on the screen and you had to eat some dots while avoiding some ghosts, and Pong, where you just simply hit a ball back and forth on the screen, to now, if any of you know games like Call of Duty or Fortnite or Dark Souls, they're very complex, or StarCraft is a very perfect example that we use a lot alongside CounterStrike. They're very complex now. It's not just as simple as doing one or two tasks. It's, as in StarCraft, you have to control so many things that are going on at the same time. For many, it's too hard to even understand the concept of the game, but the evolution has changed throughout the years of games, and so is the industry. The industry has moved to a multi-billion-dollar industry, and they now have these large budgets for these complex games. They have conferences as well. They also make a lot of money, and they put movie-grade features into these games, but not all games are big budget like these, because there's also games on our phones, there's games on arcade systems, there's independent games that not many people know of that also are out on the market. But then we also see when there's games that are these big ones like CounterStrike or StarCraft, they get into the more professional scene, where if you're good at games now, you can actually make a lot of money playing these games in professional leagues, just like if you were a football player or soccer player. And they also out here have an eSports arena. eSports is just electronic sports, and it's what they consider playing these games as when they go to tournaments to play for money prizes. We actually have one out here in Luxor that I believe opened up recently, and just in 2017, the global esports scene generated $655 million in annual revenue. And these also, just like regular sports, they have clubs, they have viewers, they have betting, and the scene is growing larger and larger as time goes on. Now, when we talk about the smaller games that don't make a lot of money, do any of you recognize this screen? So for those of you who do not recognize it, this is from a very, very popular mobile game on your phone that is called Candy Crush. And this is the form of how these kind of games can make money. For example, in this game, this uses small transactions to buy in-game currency, which is used to either increase your game time, make the game easier. That's the main point in this one, but also depending on the game, the small transactions can be used for many different reasons. But the point is that they change the gameplay in some way for real life currency. And the way this then leads into a game of chance is on here you can see this is a very popular, also competitive game that uses what we call a loot box system. And these loot boxes when it restarts, you see it explodes and these items come out, and it's supposed to look visually striking. It draws in the player, whoever's playing. And for this particular example, these are cosmetic items, so they change the way your character looks in the game. And these games the reason you want to change a character's look is it gives you your own personal identity. And with that identity, you can be your own person within this video game. And this also ties to gambling behaviors in that it is a game of chance. When you open these boxes, you do not have the same chance to get the item. It's always something random. You always get something different. You could get something you want. You could get something you don't want.
And so to help clarify how these developed and give you some context, I'll talk to you about a game near and dear to my heart and a game that has probably robbed me of several school nights. So in 2000, a couple of dudes at a house were playing a game called Half-Life, and they decided to make a mod out of it. This mod was a game called CounterStrike. The essential format is as follows. 2 teams of 5 go up against each other, and they have a variety of objectives to complete. One team designated as the terrorists. They have two goals. One is to either eliminate the opposition team or to plant a bomb and guard it until it detonates. The opposition team, referred to as the counter-terrorists, their goals are to eliminate the opposition team or to get in and defuse the bomb should it be planted before it goes off. These teams go against each other in controlled maps. They have to use their accuracy, their precision, their team preparing skills in order to outwit, outsmart, and generally outplay the opponent. Things can come down to the wire in a best of 30 format, where just one flick of the wrist can change an entire match and turn a massive lead into a turnaround win. This game evolved from something as simple as a couple of fellas coming in to play on a Saturday night into community beer leagues with small pools into now $1-million tournaments. Now, in 2013, something happened with this game as Valve, the company that later adopted this game and made it official, they released a community update called the Arms Deal, which unlocked this particular set of items called skins. As you can see in the picture up there, this is a classic sniper rifle, but what's special about it, that is the Dragon Lore AWP sniper rifle. It has about 5 stickers indicating that it's been used in 5 different tournaments, and it is currently on market for a high value cost. In fact, the bid, who wants to guess the bid? Spitball it. Not that high, actually. But you're close. Second bet? In between, actually. This skin, it is cosmetic. It does not make you better at the game. It does not help your aim. And it is clearly not good at camouflage. This was sold for $61,000 final bid in a third-party auction. This should give you some context as to where these items have gone. Valve developed a marketplace in conjunction with that update that allows players to earn these skins. You can earn them through playing at random chance, or if you're impatient, then you can put in a simple $1 or $5 to pick up some cheap skins, or pay in for a crate. As discussed by Casey earlier, the concept for the microtransaction works this way. Reward pathway, you go in, you start your game. You see a pop-up. It shows a bunch of brand new shiny skins, lots of colors, lots of audio. All you have to do is put in $1, pull the lever, see what comes out. Works on a variable ratio reinforcement schedule. You don't know what you're gonna get in that box. You could get this, or you could get some 2-cent pile of rags. You don't know, so you keep playing and playing until you see it coming. And so, given that over the years, this market, now referred to as a skins market, grew out beyond the original game. And now there are third-party companies such as CSGO Lounge, as you see pictured on the slides. They take advantage of this. You're able to take these items and now assign them as mediums for actual currency. You can use them in bets for professional sports games in much the same vein as traditional sports betting. Now they function as that medium. Now, I'm sorry. The question is, why do people buy these games? I mean, why do people buy these skins? They don't make you better. They don't hide you. And given that you have to purchase constantly, you don't know what you're going to get, it poses a major problem in that kids have access to this and that this market is largely unregulated. So in order to examine that, we needed to operationalize these terms first.
Okay, so in order to operationalize these terms, we made the three terms that you heard prior. There is the microtransaction, which is a very small financial transaction conducted online. So in Candy Crush, those little payments of using real money to get in-game currency is a microtransaction. And then the loot boxes, which were in the Overwatch, where you saw the image with the box opening, and then also how we were talking about CounterStrike, they are an in-game purchase of a virtual container that awards the items of modifications based on chance. The loot boxes are considered a type of microtransaction. And then the marketplace, which is where, if you, like in CounterStrike, if you don't want to, say, wait for the item that you want specifically, or if you don't like what you got out of these boxes, you can sell and buy them for real in-life currency. And these are all parts of a microtransaction system in video games. Now, why are these a problem? A big thing is they are predatory because they do target the emerging adults, and there's no age restrictions. It's not like a casino where you have to be 21. Anyone can participate. All they do is ask you if you're 18, but anybody can say that on a computer. You don't actually have to be. They're easily accessible. You can get them on your computer, your tablet, your phone, pretty much any smart electronic device. And they are arguably predatory because in certain things, by making them flashy or putting them in simple games like Candy Crush, they can target the youth.
And so that's where we come in on a research standpoint. So despite the scale of microtransactions within the video game market, there's actually very limited, if any, academic literature examining how microtransactions impact the gamer population. Most of what we have has come from community dialogue that later extended out towards legal proceedings and political work. Most recently, Malaysia now has a national regulatory commission for eSports gambling. So what we do know right now is that amongst eSports spectators, problem gambling has been correlated with loot box spending. The most recent study we looked at that's related to our end was about 1,000 participants selected through MTurk. This was done by Zendel and Cairns in 2019. They were able to demonstrate that increased loot box spending was correlated with problem gambling in a gamer population. They're the largest and most recent study we have to date on this relationship with loot boxes and problem gambling. So generally, they do know that participants' problem gambling was more severe as loot box spending was more severe, but the problem is they did not account for the direction of causality. It's not clear within their findings whether problem gamblers that already had pre-existing gambling issues were automatically spending more on loot boxes, or if it was the case that loot boxes were this hook that enticed otherwise typical populations into engaging in gambling, and thus the problem gambling would emerge. This was not teased out, as most of their study was predictive correlations, and not to mention with their study, sample limitations. The MTurks asked specifically for video gamers that had gambled before, and so there is a high likelihood that the participants that selected into that population may have incurred a bias into the results. That's where we come in. So, purpose of our study, to observe the role of microtransactions in gambling and gaming. Our chief questions within this study is there a relationship between gaming addiction and problem gambling? And if so, what factors might account for this relationship? And we predict that microtransactions will account for that severity in problem gambling amongst our gamer population. Setup is as follows. We did a lab study at university. Participants came in through the subject pool, did self-report survey in a controlled environment versus an MTurk computer study. We designed a new measure, which is to capture the microtransaction and loot box format. And Casey, you designed this, so go for it.
Okay, so for this measure that we created for the microtransaction and loot box gaming transactions scale, we used DSM-5 criteria for behavioral addictions, and we mapped our questions onto these on this scale, we used yes and no questions. We also used a Likert scale. We asked questions like I have used this type of system in order to make up lost money. We also asked if they had lied to family. We asked if they were chasing losses. We wanted to know if they thought it was becoming a problem, if they tried quitting and they couldn't.
And the relevant measures for our study, we measured video game addiction through the clinical video game addiction test, which asks questions about amount of hours you play on video games, what types of video games, and then maps the remaining questions on DSM-5 addiction components, including withdrawals, cravings, lying in order to conceal severity, and of course the Southwest Gambling Screen revised for adolescents. So our sample was as follows: 79 emerging adults, majority female, average age about 19 years old, and primarily domestic. Sample is representative of our university population, and the vast majority of our sample had played video games before. 70% of those that still play video games involving microtransactions. And so, our chief results. What we found within a regression analysis was that gaming addiction predicted for the severity of problem gambling. We were able to affirm the previous correlation in the Zendel and Karen study. But within that relationship of gaming addiction predicting for problem gambling severity, we found that microtransactions and loot boxes did account for that relationship, such that when microtransactions were introduced, the correlation between the predictive capacity of gaming addiction and problem gambling dropped. So let's talk about some limitations, as this is an exploratory study. And a major component that we did not include in our study was SES as a covariate. It's important to consider this for our study too, as it could be the case that a large amount of microtransactions could be purchased by individuals with a large spending capacity. However, we weren't able to tease this out as our study had a rather small sample and required a larger power in order for us to make larger claims. Also, within our relationship for the future studies, it will be important for us to disambiguate the two concepts of interest. First, the gamers. It's important to note that the Candy Crush player is not the same as the StarCraft player, it's not the same as the Pac-Man player or the CounterStrike player. And we feel that being able to tease out the functional roles of these games for these populations will be important for the next study. Furthermore, microtransactions themselves do not exist in the same spectrum. The CounterStrike microtransaction example is only one type, just as is Candy Crush, and not all microtransactions exist within that market. So if we're able to break down whether people have more problems with skins betting versus purchasing Overwatch loot boxes, it'll be important. And so we'll leave some basic takeaways for this study. Microtransactions do play a problematic role in leading young adults into problem gambling through the avenue of video games. And this is important as the emerging adult population is at particular risk for developing addictions, and not to mention they're also a population that is predisposed to playing video games. So given that, it leaves us with the question of how do we prepare for this evolution of gambling behaviors in an increasingly digital media-centric culture? So some points to consider. We can look into microtransactions, since we had kept ours rather ambiguated. They're multifaceted in design, and they include components that lure people in, starting with just advertising, getting people in with community updates, flashes on Reddit, on big news, and soliciting gamers as soon as they start at the game. Not to mention, not all microtransactions are made equal within their games. So, for example, some games will only have cosmetics, whereas some are more straightforward and actually have impact on your gameplay, such as Candy Crush. And then, of course, we need to consider the external factor of where legal regulations come in. As if I recall correctly, the only regulation we have nationally going so far is a bill that's due to be sat upon with 3 senators in August. And it's related to FTC regulations for microtransactions in particular. I wish I had the bill number for you, but it's not on the top of my head. So for this part, major grain of salt, we are not clinicians. However, given that, we would like to make some suggestions as to how you might consider video games within your practice. So given that microtransactions have such a multifaceted design, it might be wise to consider that multifaceted design. Perhaps in your differential, you can focus in on the purchasing patterns related to microtransactions, as classic business techniques of alluring shoppers to making impulsive purchases may play a role into getting into the gambling component of a loot box. Furthermore, you have to seat the microtransaction within the context of the video game that you are playing it in. So it could be that gambling disorder with microtransactions involved could be seated in the setting of internet gaming disorder, and that they have extenuating issues with controlling their video game playing behavior, and that microtransactions are a component, not necessarily the primary component within it. And so, given that, when you take this into the therapeutic setting, again, not clinicians, it might be important to gauge the functional role of the video game in your client's day-to-day living, and what kinds of genres they play, as not every genre is played for the same reason. And then examining within that, where do microtransactions fit within that video game, and then you can determine whether or not that could be problematic. So given that, thank you for allowing us to present with you wonderful people. Now, any questions?